Your Eminences, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, professors, ladies and gentlemen. It is with profound honor and great joy that I welcome you to Migration, a Pilgrimage of Hope, International Conference on Migration, Theological and Social Studies. Migration remains one of the most urgent and complex challenges of our time. Across the world, countless individuals, families are forced to leave their homes due to conflict, poverty, and the devastating effects of climate change. In this global reality, theology plays a crucial role, offering not only moral and ethical frameworks, but also spiritual resources to respond to these movements of people with compassion, justice, and hope. Over the next 3 days, we will reflect together on the intersections between migration and theology. We aim to explore how faith, grounded in Christian tradition and open to interfaith dialogue, can inspire concrete responses that uphold the dignity of migrants and refugees, promote integration, and foster solidarity across borders. This event builds upon a long journey of theological reflection on migration, following the path traced by previous international conferences, beginning in 2002 in Tijuana and continuing through Notre Dame, Sao Paulo, Manila, Salzburg, Brazzaville, culminating in Rome in 2021. Today, we look ahead with renewed commitment to deepen our understanding, to strengthen collaborative partnership, and to develop effective pastoral and academic response to contemporary realities of human mobility. This conference is made possible through the collaboration of several esteemed institutions. We warmly thank the Pontifical Urbaniana University, the Notre Dame University, Scalabrini International Migration Institute, the Keough School of Global Affairs and its institutes, the Klau Institute for Civil and Human Rights, the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, and the Kellogg Institute, as well as the Notre Dame Poverty Initiative. We are also deeply grateful to the Dicastery for promoting integral human development, the Consilium Conferentiarum Episcoporum Europae, the International Union of Superiors General, and the Union of Superiors General. Your support has been essential in bringing together such a rich diversity of voices and experiences. We are also begin with a few notes. Before proceeding, allow me to share a brief insight of your welcome folder. You'll find a page containing QR codes that grant you access to all essential information about the conferences. You may also have noticed some posters outside featuring portraits of people. These are part of the photographic exhibition Umanità Ininterrotta, Uninterrupted Humanity, which I'm pleased to briefly introduce to you now. This exhibition is the result of a journey along the Balkan route, the path that thousands of people travel every day in search of protection and better future to reach Europe. In 2019, a group of young volunteers of the Scalabrini Agency for Development Cooperation decided to set out on this journey, meeting with men, children, women along the way. They listened to their stories, they saw their own eyes and the injustice of borders, but also the hope that endures and the solidarity that erases in most difficult places. This journey gave rise to a book that collects stories, testimonies, and photographs of humans on the move. In addition, the project gave rise to The Game, an educational workshop that in the form of a role-playing game helps young people and communities emphasize with those facing a migration journey and reflect on the challenge of crossing borders. But the heart of what we are presenting to you these days is the photographic exhibition. Each image is a window onto that journey. Border areas, wire fences, but also the faces, glances, and small, everyday gesture of people on the move, and of all those who decide to break down the walls of indifference to concrete signs of humanity. It is a visual narrative that invites us to slow down, observe, and listen. These photos are not only intended to document, but also to raise questions, break down indifference, and make us feel part of a humanity that remains unbroken despite the barriers. Looking at them, we can grasp the strength, dignity, and hope that dwells in every person. We invite you to get involved, to talk to each other, to share the emotions that this image will evoke you. because the exhibition is not just something to be seen, but something to be experienced. It is an invitation to recognize our shared responsibility in building a more just and welcoming world. Now it is my honor to introduce you the institutional greetings that will officially open our conference and help set the tone for the important discussions that lie ahead. I'll give the word to His Eminence Cardinal Luis Antonio Coquim-Tagle, Grand Chancellor of the Pontifical Urbaniana University, to Reverend Professor Daniel Grudi, Vice President at the University of Notre Dame, and Father Carlos Caetano, Vicar General of the Missionary of St. Charles Scalabrini. Thank you, everyone, and welcome once again.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. May the God of hope, who in the Word made flesh, fill us with every joy and peace in our faith through the power of the Holy Spirit, be among us.
And with your spirit.
Dear brothers and sisters, we are gathered here in Rome in this Jubilee year from many nations as pilgrims of hope to reflect, to study, and to share together knowledge and best practices in service of the theology of human mobility and for our brothers and sisters, migrants and refugees who journey along roads, cross the seas, and traverse the skies of the world. Yet, each of us is a migrant, united in our common search for Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, and reaching out towards the longed-for harbor of our heavenly homeland. Let us implore the Holy Spirit to inspire our reflection, study, and sharing during these days, and to grant us the grace to discover new paths for promoting fraternity, justice, and peace amongst peoples.
Let us pray. O God, Father of all peoples and Lord of history, you guided Abraham on his journey to a new land. You accompanied your people in the desert and sent your Son to share in the joys and struggles of exiles and pilgrims. Look with love upon all who embark on their journeys today, searching for peace, dignity, and hope. Bless this gathering of ours. Enlighten our minds as we search for truth, and open our hearts to receive whatever you wish to suggest to us. Grant us the ability to recognize the face of Christ in every migrant, refugee, and person on the move. We are certain that in every rejected migrant, it is Christ who knocks at the door. May our reflection be an instrument of truth, and may our actions serve humanity on the move. Holy Spirit, Spirit of wisdom and discernment, help us recognize the signs of the times. Awaken in us the wisdom of the gospel, and make us builders of bridges, sowers of welcome, and witnesses of hope in a church that is a home for all. Mary, Mother of every migrant, you who have known exile and the search for refuge, accompany with your tenderness every step of this conference, and intercede for all peoples on the move, so that no one may ever feel like a stranger again, but rather a brother and sister to be loved. Blessed be the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Spirit. Amen. Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, esteemed professors, researchers, dear students, both those present here and the many others connected with us today from various countries, representing more than 70 institutes affiliated with our Faculty of Theology, dear guests and friends gathered from different parts of the world. Good morning or good evening in some parts of the world. It is with joy and gratitude that I welcome you to this international conference, Migration, a Pilgrimage of Hope, organized by the Faculty of Theology of our Urbaniana University, the University of Notre Dame, the Scalabrini International Migration Institute, the Keough School of Global Affairs with its affiliated institutes, and made possible thanks to the participation of authoritative voices, researchers, pastoral workers, and witnesses engaged in the field. We live in a time when the movement of millions of people is a tangible sign of profound changes, wars and persecutions that force people to flee, environmental crises that destroy entire territories, structural poverty that forces people to seek dignified living conditions elsewhere. While people have the right to stay in their home countries, many are forced to migrate despite their desire to stay home. Forced migration is fast becoming normal. But let us not forget, it is forced. In this context, the church is called not only to react, but to be present in a prophetic way, offering places of welcome, human promotion, paths of integration, and words of hope. As Pope Leo XIV states, and I quote, "The church, like a mother, walks with those who walk. Where the world sees threats, she sees children. Where walls are built, she builds bridges. She knows that her proclamation of the gospel is credible only when it is translated into gestures of closeness and welcome. And she knows that in every rejected migrant, it is Christ himself who knocks at the door of the community." End of quote from the Lexi Te, number 74. The phenomenon of migration challenges not only our consciences, but the entire Christian community today, together with theology. What form should mission take today? How can we concretely translate the Church's mission in a context of constant mobility and growing cultural and religious pluralism? Migration, in fact, is not only a challenge, but an extraordinary opportunity to renew the Church's missionary enthusiasm, to live the gospel of encounter more authentically. We usually think of mission as going to places different from ours, going to other countries, and rightly so, ad gentes. But through migrants, different parts of the world enter or compenetrate each other. You don't need to go to another country to visit those countries, thanks to the migrants. But through migrants, diverse parts of the world enter and compenetrate each other, providing new spaces and understandings of mission. Today, mission cannot be imagined as a unidirectional movement from a center to a periphery, but rather as a dialogue, an interweaving of stories, a shared journey. After all are migrants. You don't seem to agree. Human mobility is the privileged place for this new mission that has concrete face, families, young people, children, women, and men who bring with them languages, traditions, experiences of faith, wounds to be healed, and their culinary wealth. Pastoral care in this context becomes the fine and delicate art of accompaniment, capable of bringing together liturgical, catechetical, social, and human dimensions. As the church serves Jesus, who is present in the strangers, foreigners, migrants, and refugees, we are also called to learn from them and to be evangelized by them. In their unique ways, they teach us what it means to hope and to persevere. In many parts of the world, migrants are the most zealous missionaries. As the Bible and history attest, migration in God's hands becomes a missionary movement. As we were opening, I met a Capuchin priest who is hi Father, who is in Abu Dhabi. So I will visit Abu Dhabi and Dubai in December to celebrate Mass for the Filipino community, the migrants there. They have brought to Dubai and Abu Dhabi the tradition of the Simbang Gabi, the novena of Masses. And in Dubai, every day for 9 days, only 30,000 people attend the Mass. Only 30,000. And in Abu Dhabi, they say 17,000 every day. A church on the move is stable, whereas other churches who claim to be stable are, I don't know. Okay. Our university, that's not part of the text. Our university, as part of the Dicastery of Evangelization, is a concrete laboratory of dialogue, communion, and prophecy. As a privileged place of encounter for people and experiences from all over the world, and faithful to its almost 4 centuries old history, the Urbaniana remains ever attentive to the signs of the times that require discernment, enlightened by academic research and evangelical passion. For this, through the Faculty of Theology, a specific academic program of licentiate and doctorate degrees is offered in intercultural pastoral theology and the theology of human mobility. This conference is a starting point, not a simple goal. The dialogues, relationships, and encounters we will have in the coming days must translate into concrete proposals, networks of collaboration, and shared projects. Allow me to express my sincere appreciation to the organizing committee and all the entities involved who, with patience and dedication, have made every detail of this conference possible. To the speakers from different continents who have accepted the invitation to share their research and testimonies, to the partner institutions, both academic and ecclesial, their support and research support and formation on these issues, and to all the participants, I invite each of you to live these days with an open spirit. After all, the theme is pilgrimage of hope. Please look hopeful. Allow yourselves to be challenged. Question your preconceptions. Dare to think of new models of mission, social, and pastoral care that are appropriate for our times. So in the name of the Dicastery and the Urbaniana University, I wish you all the best for these days. Thank you. And may I ask pardon because a group of bishops from Papua New Guinea are waiting for me. So will you excuse me so I could meet them? Only if you allow me. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Well, thank you, everybody. On behalf of my colleagues at Notre Dame, I'd like to also welcome you. And in particular, I want to just name some of the colleagues who made this conference possible. Dean Mary Gallagher, who is our Dean of our Keough School, who will be with us today. Professor Jen McElward, who leads up our Klau Institute for Civil and Human Rights, who's a very generous participant and benefactor of this. The Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies with Professor Aaron Corcoran, our Kellogg Institute, our Poverty Initiative, including two of our new scholars who are here with us, Alexander and Amy. You can raise your hands here joining us, and other parts of our community who are really grateful to contribute to this. Those of you who don't know Notre Dame is near Chicago, and it's a school that was founded originally to serve migrant communities. And it became also a place in time that was known as the Fighting Irish. It was closely associated with our football team, but in many ways it was really connected to an immigrant community fighting for human dignity. So this was something that's become very important to us at the core of our mission. And when it came time to do this conference, it was also an opportunity to claim something of our values and our roots. But there's a history here, and I wanted to share something about how the history of this conference came about. And it first happened in the early 2000s, around 2001, when the Scalabrini community had a conference in Tijuana, Mexico, and began to look at this question of migration, and particularly some of its connections to the church. In 2004, we had a conference at Notre Dame, and I want to point out Gioacchino Campesi, that we actually began organizing that conference and really wanted to gather practitioners and scholars together to reflect on this issue of migration. Theology and migration wasn't really a topic that there was a lot of literature on, but we thought that there were deeply theological aspects to it, and we thought it would be good to draw that out a bit more. But since then, there's been many other conferences like this, but what I want to say in particular was something about the methodology of that conference. And I got this from Virgil Elizondo. Sister Norma would have known him very well, and others in this room. He taught me many things, but one of the things he said at that time is that the important thing is to create a community of friends. Second, who are interested in common themes, who thirdly can be capable of working on projects together. And as I think about the last 20-some years, probably one of the biggest and most important aspects are the friendships that have developed. And as I look around this room at Gioacchino, at Victor, at Don Kerwin, look at many other people here, including Peter Fahn, and Anna, and others, that there were friendships that developed during this time that I think have greatly enriched our work together. And so I hope this is really a time to develop new networks and new friendships that can continue to advance that work going forward. This is especially valuable because out of those friendships also came a connection with now Cardinal Fabio Baggio. And connecting with Fabio over the years and Gioacchino a year and a half ago, we were discussing about how to continue to advance this work and this topic. So over a dinner about a year and a half ago, we said, wouldn't it be good to come together again to create new networks of friendships, but also to help empower and strengthen the next generation, those who could go forward and carry on this work and continue to think about the pastoral, the academic, the theological themes that are related to this important work around migration. And why theology? I think theology cuts to the core. Some of you may be very familiar with the connections of theology and migration. Some of you may be getting into it for the first time. But I think at the core, we're trying to figure out what it means to be human before God. And it's always struck me that in working in interdisciplinary institutes on migration, was sometimes theology was completely left out of the discussion. But as we know, working with migrants, is that when you lose everything, your homeland, your background, your family, your possessions, all you have left is God. And for many migrants, this is an opportunity, I think, to teach the church and the whole world about who we are in our most authentic form and what it means to be human together. So I think theology names something of what it means to be human before God. It awakens our hearts and calls us to form networks of solidarity. But above all, it reminds us of our call to communion. I think as I was thinking over the years about what is this deep connection between theology and migration, I think one thing became clear. And Kevin, is that you back there? It's you back there. So Kevin invited me to come in 2000 to a mass at the border, at the U.S. border. Some of you may be familiar with this, but this was a Eucharist at the border. He was working at the Bishops' Conference at the time. And when I experienced it, it was really extraordinary, is that you had half the community in Mexico, half the community in the United States. They joined the altar together at the fence, and they celebrated one Eucharist with communities on both sides. And so it raised that question of saying, what does it mean to celebrate the Eucharist in the context of such a divided political reality, which actually has become even more divisive and more dehumanizing. And I think it's here especially that the church offers us a witness to hope and a witness of what it means to be a body of Christ, a human community, a common family before God, amidst the rhetoric that continues to dualize, polarize, and demean human beings. And at the heart of that is really recognizing our call to communion. If the ritual and the sacrament of the Eucharist really speaks to God's call to make us one in the context of a very fragmented community, I think as pilgrims of hope, it's really about a journey towards communion. And what we see in Jesus is God constantly wanting to break down those walls, those barriers, those divisions, which keep us from being united to God and to one another. So it's my hope that these days will be tremendous days of journeying together, building bonds of friendship, of exploring these important topics together, and of journeying hope as we think about the coming of God's reign and the call to be who we are in our journey with one another. So thank you again for coming. I look forward to these days.
Your Eminences, Your Excellencies, dear professors, researchers, students, and friends, it is with deep gratitude that I bring greetings from Father Leonid Chiarello, Superior General of the Missionaries of St. Charles Scalabrinians and President of the Scalabrini International Migration Institute, who is unable to attend today due to unexpected and unpostponable institutional commitments. He asked me to convey his warm greetings and sincere apologies to everyone. And for me, Vicar General of the Scalabrini Missionaries and alumnus of SIMI 20 years ago, it is a particular honor to deliver this opening address. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and partners of this conference, the Pontifical Urbaniana University, the University of Notre, the Dicastery for promoting integral human development, the Council of European Bishops' Conferences, the International Union of Superiors General, and the Union of Superiors General, which together with SIMI have made this event possible. A special word of gratitude goes to His Eminence, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. I had the opportunity to speak with him before. And also to the Reverend Professor Father Daniel Grudi for their presence, but especially for their constant commitment to combining theology, pastoral action, and the concrete lives of migrant people. This conference takes place in a historical context marked by contradictions. Far from being a marginal issue, migration is at the center of public debate and often divides opinions, polarizes politics, and generates fear and exploitation. In this scenario, academic and theological reflection is called upon to offer words of wisdom and discernment. Pope Leo, in his message for the 111th World Day of Migrants and Refugees, stated, "In a world darkened by wars and injustices, migrants and refugees stand as messengers of hope. This hope is not naive, but springs from faith, from the resilience of women and men who, despite their precarious situation, believe. They believe and hope in the possibility of a better future. It is in this perspective that theology is called to dialogue with social sciences, with economics, psychology, communication, politics. Only a multidisciplinary and intercultural approach allows us to understand migration not as an emergency, but as a sign of the times, as a lens through which to read the dynamics of globalization and the human condition. In a recent message sent to his fellow Scalabrini missionaries, Father Chiarello recalled that indifference makes us blind, powerlessness makes us immobile, and both undermine fraternity and universal solidarity. This lucid and dramatic diagnosis challenges us against the globalization of powerlessness evoked by Pope Leo in last month's video message to the inhabitants of Lampedusa. We are called to build a culture of reconciliation in which academic research and pastoral commitment converge to transform knowledge into justice and faith into solidarity. The Holy Father's homily during the Jubilee for Migrants in the Missionary World, celebrated on October the 5th, also left us with a valuable message. He said, "The seas and deserts that you, our migrant brothers and sisters, have crossed are, in Scripture, places of salvation, where God made himself present to save his people." From this perspective, human mobility is not just a problem to be managed, but a true theological place where the pilgrim face of God himself is manifested. The virtue of hope that will guide the debate in the coming days, the virtue of hope is not spiritual evasion. It is a critical principle that questions our institutions, our policies, even our language. It is hope that drives the church to go beyond borders, to inhabit the geographical and existential frontiers where universal fraternity is built. It is hope that transforms human mobility into a journey of faith, diaspora into communion, and vulnerability into prophecy. As Pope Leo writes in this year's message for World Migrant Day, migrants and refugees remind the Church of its pilgrim dimension, perpetually striving towards its definitive homeland. In this context, the contribution of universities, research centers, and religious communities becomes decisive. We need a way of thinking that does not separate theology from history, but that knows how to read history in the light of faith and faith within history. And I believe that this is the profound meaning of our gathering, to create spaces for dialogue where the theology of human mobility becomes a theology of hope, a theology of hope capable of inspiring new policies, new cultures, new relationships. Allow me also to highlight this happy anniversary. This year, SIMI, the Scalabrini International Migration Institute, SIMI celebrates 25 years since its foundation. Established in 2000 under the auspices of the Scalabrini missionaries, the Institute has sought to combine academic rigor with ecclesial commitment, promoting the training of researchers and pastoral workers. Its history testifies that theological reflection can be both science, but also prophecy. Science and prophecy, rooted in the concrete experience of migration and illuminated by the gospel message. Over the past quarter century, SIMI's academic community has contributed to consolidating a true theology of human mobility, capable of illuminating the dynamics of migration with faith and suggesting paths for pastoral and social action. I conclude by recalling the words of St. John Baptist Scalabrini, a man, a prophet, who knew how to read the migration of his time with the eyes of faith. He said, "While races mix, spread, and blend, through the noise of our machines, above all this feverish activity, all these gigantic works, and not without them, a much vaster, much nobler, much more sublime work is maturing here below. The union in God, through Jesus Christ, of all people of goodwill." In these words which combine theological vision, but also prophetic intuition, we find a common thread of our mission and hopefully the meaning of this conference: to transform mobility into opportunity, exodus into encounter, migration into hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these wonderful reflections and prayers that open our conference. And now I'm really happy to welcome here Annalisa Vandelli, writer, photojournalist, for the panel of Narrating Migration. Please join us. Sister Norma Pimentel of the Catholic Charities of Rio Grande Valley.
Buongiorno a tutti, a tutte. Io vi ringrazio tanto di questo invito che mi ha provocato proprio su una riflessione che dura da 20 anni, che è quella del viaggio. Io viaggio da 20 anni come migrante, però col biglietto di ritorno in tasca, come reporter, sono una narratrice. E la prima cosa che ho pensato è che a me manca un viaggio di migranti che sono vicino a me. È un viaggio di cui parliamo poco ed è un viaggio che non comincia da un paese, ma comincia dal mondo. Non abitiamo più la terra e il cielo, bensì Google Earth e il cloud. Il mondo si fa sempre più inafferrabile, nuvoloso, spettrale. Ci sono un sacco di ragazzi e ragazze che ormai migrano nelle loro stanze, si isolano. E questa è una cosa per noi drammatica. E mi pongo rispetto a loro da fotoreporter. Il nostro mestiere funziona se noi siamo vicini. Se noi siamo vicini. Il nostro mestiere non è una questione tecnica, non si risolve con una buona macchina fotografica, ma col contatto, con la relazione. Un mio maestro scriveva, un poeta molto bravo, Karl Lubomirski, scriveva: "Sono così distante da me che senza te non mi raggiungerei mai." Ve la ridico. Io sono così distante da me che senza te non mi raggiungerei mai. Ho bisogno di un altro per raggiungermi. Ho bisogno di un altro per raccontare e per raccontarmi. Ho viaggiato per anni in paesi cosiddetti in via di sviluppo per svilupparmi. E a 50 anni sono diventata consapevole di questo. E allora penso a questo viaggio stabile degli hikikomori che migrano in una stanza buia e migrano in uno schermo. E adesso vi racconto un po' invece dei miei viaggi per terra e insieme ad altri. E questo è il primo. Qui siamo tra persone che stanno fuggendo dalla Siria e E questo è un padre che diventa una colonna per un viaggio che è infinito. Io non so più dove sono queste persone, non so cosa gli è successo, so però che per un punto della mia vita ho avuto un contatto forte con loro e mi hanno formato. Di nuovo, in fuga dalla Siria, qui in Libano, e sono le storie che fanno la differenza. Le fotografie citano, ma non sono sufficienti per dire veramente. Noi viviamo in un mondo, e questo credo che sia importante per questo incontro che stiamo facendo, dove la fotografia è diventata fondamentale. Fin da piccoli ci insegnano a parlare, ma non ci insegnano a capire le immagini. E attraverso le immagini attualmente veniamo ampiamente manipolati. Figure come la mia, io sono freelance, sono in estinzione e viene raccontata sempre con la stessa immagine la storia. Allora qui siamo in fuga dalla Siria. Nada, la mamma, l'ho trovata in Libano in una tenda di fortuna. Vivevano sotto assedio, finito da mangiare, il marito è andato a cercare da mangiare. Dopo 3 giorni non era ancora tornato. Viene a sapere Nada che era stato ucciso dai cecchini. Le domando, era così importante tuo marito? E lei mi spiega che i cecchini 2 volte alla settimana si allenano. E si allenano su degli obiettivi. Pancia di donna incinta, gamba destra di maschio cinquantenne. Questa è la guerra è qualcosa di molto concreto. E allora Nada ha preso le sue 2 bambine e se n'è andata, è riuscita a attraversare il confine. E Nada l'ho fotografata senza testa, perché al posto di quella testa può esserci ciascuna di noi. Perché la fotografia è questo, l'immedesimazione, deve avere una forza di immedesimazione. Lo stranglizzo, no? In greco, è l'entrare nelle viscere. Finché noi non entriamo in quella compassione, in quel soffrire insieme, sentire insieme, la fotografia non funziona il racconto. Una storia d'amore, campo profughi di Shusha, confine Tunisia-Libia. Li ho incontrati lì insieme dentro a una chiesa. Questa è una cattedrale. Vedete la Via Crucis sullo sfondo. Loro sono fuggiti dall'Eritrea, lavoravano in Libia, scoppia la guerra in Libia, lei è incinta, lui viene catturato e viene messo nei lager libici, non si vedono per mesi, lei ha complicazioni del parto, viene portata in ospedale. Esce dall'ospedale senza il bambino e senza il rene. Fugge verso la Tunisia, arriva in questo campo profughi a Shusha e non ha notizia di lui, che ugualmente scappa verso Shusha e si ritrovano. Questa è una storia tremenda, a lieto fine, perché adesso vivono insieme in Canada. E questa è la cattedrale, dal di fuori. E quel signore sulla destra è un sacerdote italiano, si chiama Don Sandro, che ha deciso anche lui di camminare insieme ai suoi parrocchiani, agli eritrei in fuga. E questo a me ha detto tanto. Non è tornato in Trentino, ma ha fatto lo stesso viaggio, è arrivato con loro. E ancora storia di speranza. Lei l'ho incontrata a Aqaba, fuggiva dalla Siria ed era nascosta insieme a tanti bambini in un palazzo mezzo distrutto, ma salendo verso il piano dove lei abitava si sentivano dei cinguettii. Chiudendo gli occhi poteva essere una primavera sulla montagna. E allora mi ha raccontato che i suoi 4 figli sono stati uccisi, suo marito Lei l'ha sepolto con le sue mani perché all'obitorio le chiedevano un riscatto ed era riuscita a fuggire lì con i bambini e le mogli vedove. E allora quegli uccellini, ed ecco qui, come l'essere umano trova forme di resistenza e di speranza nei modi più impensati. Quegli uccellini le servivano per avere una tregua dal dolore. Chiudeva gli occhi ed era altrove. E mi ha detto: io li libererò. Quando potrò tornare in Siria, io li libererò. Il mio mestiere è stato un pretesto per anni di incontri straordinari. È stata una scusa per fare incontri straordinari, per incontrare volti. Tonino Bello, quando sono arrivati questa nave, no, la Vlora, carica di albanesi in Italia, e noi eravamo tutti allarmati, 20.000 albanesi credo, ci sembrava un'invasione, eravamo alle prime armi, no? E Tonino Bello ha detto una cosa straordinaria: non fermatevi ai numeri. Quante volte noi in televisione, nei media, sentiamo dei numeri, ma i numeri non sostituiranno mai i volti. Mai i volti. Uno a uno. Uno a uno. L'etica del volto. Lui l'ha chiamata così, l'etica del volto. Se noi non riusciamo a riconoscerci in quell'altro volto, abbiamo perso il nostro. Ecco perché sono partita dagli hikikomori. Abbiamo bisogno dell'altro volto, è esistenziale, moriamo, davanti a uno schermo e basta, moriamo. E allora vi ho portato qualche volto in fuga. Ho frequentato tanto i confini perché sono luoghi per me dell'assurdo, nel senso che una linea immaginaria determina un prima e un dopo. È assurdo, se ci fermiamo a pensare, è assurdo, è una convenzione che però ti cambia la vita. Quindi ho frequentato i confini per raccontare questo prima e il dopo. Questo è il confine in Giordania, dove la polizia portava questi profughi in attesa, questi futuri profughi. E sono i volti dell'arrivo, uno a uno, lo spaesamento, la burocrazia e i volti della guerra, quando si fugge da una guerra. E i volti, invece, che iniziano a far parte della burocrazia. Mi ricordo un amico in Kenya, padre Kizito, che forse qualcuno di voi conosce, e doveva assumere un custode. E voleva assumere in particolare un signore anziano e gli ha detto: mi dovresti dare la carta d'identità. E questo gli ha risposto: ma cos'è? Io non ce l'ho, ma cos'è? È un documento che dice che tu sei tu. E lui giustamente gli ha risposto: ma come? Ma io sono io. Ma no, devi dimostrare che tu sei tu. E questo signore si è tagliato e ha detto: sono io. Questo è il mio sangue. Più di questo cosa posso darti per dirti che sono io? Questa foto nel deserto mi dice: ok, riuscirà a dimostrare che è lei? Riusciranno a passare l'altro livello del videogioco? Acaba, vi racconto la nostra speranza. Vogliamo fare la rotta, passare la rotta del Mediterraneo, e in questo disegno su una porta vi racconteremo il nostro viaggio. Che bandiera battiamo? Peace, 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 mi ripeteva. Noi porteremo pace. E si arriva di là. Lampedusa, 2023, 7.000 persone in un hotspot da 600. Numero bagni, 16. Venivano raccontati come un'invasione. In realtà erano ragazzi e ragazze con una vivacità che ha vivificato anche me e che portavano la loro giovinezza. E la prima cosa che fai dai da mangiare. Tutti hanno aperto le porte. Questo è raccontato poco. I cittadini di Lampedusa, i turisti, la parrocchia. E qui mi è capitata una cosa straordinaria. Ho chiesto a un ragazzo se potevo fotografarlo e lui mi ha mostrato il suo piatto con una sardina e mi ha detto: ne vuoi un po'? E allora ho detto: no, sono piena, ho già mangiato. No dai, ne vuoi un po'? E io lì ho capito la logica del dividere per moltiplicare. Lui era arrivato a Lampedusa a forza di dividere. A forza di dividere. Questi sconfiggono la matematica, la nostra matematica, che invece è quella del frigorifero, che è quella dell'accumulo. E ancora, non so se riuscite a vedere, ma tra gli uomini in divisa e i bambini sul molo ci sono delle bolle di sapone. E io credo che questa foto sia la divisa che non divide. L'umanità è quella che vince, di nuovo guardarsi in faccia e dire: va bene, io ho questa divisa, sono qui per tenere l'ordine, però sai cosa c'è? Tiro fuori le bolle di sapone e tengo l'ordine ancora meglio, perché tengo l'ordine anche in me stesso. È ancora una divisa che non divide. Dopo questa foto io sono stata arrestata, ma intanto l'ho fatta ed è mossa, però funziona. E ancora, e tra poco mi fermo, lo sciame mediatico. Okay. Lo sciame mediatico. Io a Lampedusa, per la prima volta nella mia vita, veramente dopo 20 anni di viaggi, ho incontrato lo sciame mediatico. In aereo ho conosciuto un cameraman della RAI che mi ha detto: guarda, ti aiuto io, quando sei là ti dico io dove andare. E io penso: ma com'è possibile? Cioè noi viviamo nel cercare storie diverse dagli altri e tu mi dici, mi dai le tue storie? Che generosità. Invece no, tutti insieme. I giornalisti sono sempre tutti insieme. Tutti raccontiamo la stessa storia. Abbiamo bisogno di freelance, o anche attraverso le agenzie. Tutti comprano la stessa fotografia, siamo abbonati alle stesse agenzie. Ma così tutti avremo un pensiero unico, anche sulla migrazione. E questo è deleterio. Lo sguardo è importante. Abbiamo bisogno di freelance. Ed ecco qua. Ricordate l'hotspot all'inizio con le sbarre? Dovevano starci 7.000 persone dentro. E la conferenza stampa, non a caso, veniva proprio fuori dall'hotspot. Ma cosa succedeva appena voltato l'occhio? Questo. Per riprendere dentro all'hotspot si saliva una collinetta, ma intanto gli ospiti entravano e uscivano. Ci siete? Tutti guardiamo la stessa cosa, ma la notizia è da un'altra parte. E ci scavalca la notizia. E questa è una foto, secondo me, simbolica. Il giovane partì insieme con l'angelo e anche il cane li seguì. Grazie.
Thank you, Annalisa, for your powerful stories and narration, and for bringing us different point of view on how to document the journey and the story of the people. And now, please, Sister Norma, join us with also your powerful stories. We're looking forward to it for you.
Buenos dias. So I'm going to narrate my experience and my witnessing at the border of South Texas, border of Mexico with the United States, where I am from. I actually grew up, I'm a native of the valley, of the Rio Grande Valley. South Texas border with Mexico is a stretch of land called the Rio Grande Valley. It's where I am from and have lived there all my life. I would like to share with you how our faith there in the Rio Grande Valley has defined us as a community in South Texas, as part of the world here at the border by Mexico. Ahí somos familia. We're a family because we are a community very strongly defined by our culture. We celebrate life and faith as one. When we define ourselves, who we are, God, our faith, our family and community, it is all one and the same, you know. When we are sick, it is very common for us to get calls or people from all our friends and family come and visit us and tell us, ¿quieres un caldito, you know, or you want a tecito de la abuela? You know, it's how we take care of each other, you know, porque we know that God is watching over us, and because God is watching over us, we also believe that we take part in helping God take care of ourselves. And so it's no surprise for us how we responded when large numbers of people came to the border in South Texas to enter the United States. And the response was one of welcoming. All of us, we came together as one community to help these many thousands of immigrants that were arriving at our border. The theology of welcoming. To understand ourselves, our faith, and who we are as people of God, and what we believe, the gospel, is to understand welcoming, what that means. It's meeting the stranger and becoming family in that encounter. Well, Francis spoke to us so much about the fact of this culture of encounter. Well, we lived it there at the border. Many of us, even present here today, were part of that. Encountering the other, the family, the stranger, that person that was there before us in conditions that were so heartbreaking. It moved us to want to reach out and be present to them. It was something that brought us together and transformed us as people in understanding who God it was for us by the presence of these strangers, immigrants that were there in our community in conditions that called us forward to help and to do something about what we were seeing. So there is this sense of a theology of presence that becomes very real for us. You know, I remember how many people came down to see how they could be part of and help. And I remember a group of seminarians asking me, sisters, we're going to the other side of the border. We're going to be with the immigrants. Tell me, what do I do? How do I respond? And my words to them was like, all you need to do is be present. That's all. And when you're present to them, God will then show you how to respond, what to say, what to do. You know, you don't have to worry about that, but you do have to be present to them. And when we are present, there's a special encounter that happens right there with the family, with a child, with a mother, with a parent. And you know that you're in the presence of God. This theology of presence at the border is very real, and I always invite everybody, even presidents, come down and see them. See their faces. Allow yourself to get close enough so that you can be able to experience what I have experienced when I'm present to an immigrant. This very first response is that our initial contact with immigrants actually validates the fact that they are created in the image and likeness of God. Not only do we see God present in our immigrant brothers and sisters, but we also reflect the likeness to God in our actions. We respond ourselves in a way that makes God present through our actions, in our own, I always say our own likeness and to God is reflected in how we behave, how we act, how we love, how we care for others. In our compassion and kindness to our brothers and sisters, it is how we live out that presence of God in us. The very first days when we started to organize our humanitarian response, our local authorities came over to our center and asked us, Sister Norma, what are you doing here? You know, we were in this parish hall, Sacred Heart, and the parish hall was packed with families, both immigrants and local families that were actually there wanting to help. And the city officials wanted to be able to figure out what's going on here. So he asked me, what are you doing here, sister? I turned and I looked at the parish and it was packed and I saw all these amazing things that were happening. Turned back and looked at this man and I said, restoring human dignity, that's what we're doing. He didn't expect my answer and he kind of thought twice about it, then comes back and says, I really thought he was going to just lay down all the city codes I was breaking, you know? And so, because we had so many people in that parish hall. And so he says, Sister, if I had a magic wand, what would that magic wand do for you? And I just said, showers? Sure enough, that evening, I had a mobile unit of 8 showers. And the next day, the mayor of the city said, anything the sister wants, you give it to her. Restoring human dignity. It is something that defines who we are. And it is what brought us together as one community, all of us. It didn't matter if you were Catholic, Jewish, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Evangelical. All of us were present as one, I believe, one church, you know, one community. It was everybody from universities, city governments, doctors, restaurants. There was no difference. We didn't see ourselves separate. We saw ourselves as one, responding to a reality that we believed was the right thing to do. We are created in the image and likeness of God. Every person is a reflection of God's presence. And that is what was moved within us. That is what we saw. We didn't saw an immigrant, we saw God. Human dignity is a given gift by the grace of God. Life is sacred and must be protected, defended, upheld, and respected by every person. It is therefore very important how we respond to our immigrant brothers and sisters. We must always do our part in making sure every person, especially those who have been mistreated and hurt, that we welcome and promote their human dignity. You know, my personal experience at the border, in the very initial stages of when we started receiving all these families at the border, was when they were in detention facilities. And they were and this story I share a lot because it's what grounded me to understand what it was that I, Norma, needed to be doing in response to what the immigrants there at the border and what we were seeing. And I saw children, kids, little ones, in detention facility. And the response that I saw, the Border Patrol agents transform themselves when they saw me praying with the children. They were the little ones. They were all like in great numbers in detention, only simply because the United States didn't have any other option but to keep them there until they figure out where to send them, because they have some policies in place that says that children must be kept in the under the custody of refugee and resettlement, and if you're not, the Border Patrol was forced to keep them until they figured out where to send them. So in the meantime, these kids were all dirty and muddy and crying and with mud all dried up in their bodies, little chiquitos, little ones, in the thousands at the border. Something that just grabs you and just don't understand why this is happening. When you see them crying and like pulling my dress and telling me, sácame de aquí, por favor. Get me out of here, please. I just started to cry with him and pray. And when I would say, Diosito, ayúdanos, they would repeat after me, God, please help us. I saw the officers looking in and seeing and witnessing the children that had been stopped being just a body or a number, and they were crying also. And they told me, thank you, sister. You helped us realize they're human beings. Somehow, somehow there's a sense of we lose sight of our own humanity when we just simply don't realize that we're people. And they're kids, they're little ones, I think that the theology, our theology of how we understand God and present with us, is one that upholds the dignity of every person, the sacredness of every person, and makes it real for us to be able to do the right thing and to live out our faith. And the border, just want to share one more story of how bad it was when we had the most people right there on the Mexican side, Reynosa, Texas, with several shelters run mostly by a lot of them evangelical pastors. And we had like 3,000 inside in the shelter and maybe 5 or 6 or 8,000 outside. I mean, can you imagine that amount of people just wanting desperately to drink water, to eat, to be out of the hot sun? It's just this sun that it's terrible. With children and crying and wanting to, please help me. And there's no way we can get anybody inside. And the pastor says, sister, ayúdeme, help me. And we opened the doors of the shelter one day, and all these people just want to run inside. And in the midst of, I was trying to get driving the van to go get another group of people to take them into another shelter. All these people I was just waiting for them to move the people aside. And this story was so powerful for me because in the midst of thousands of people that were already inside and many more outside wanting to just find their way inside, there was this one mother that I saw in the whole crowd. It reminds me, and as I was sharing this to somebody, it reminded me of Jesus. Remember when Jesus said, who touched me? And they said, well, there's so many people around you. How can you say when somebody touched you when actually, he felt the touch of somebody? That day, that night, I saw this mother amongst thousands of people out there desperately wanting to enter this shelter. And there's this very tiny, petite mom with this baby wrapped in her arms. A tiny little bit thing inside herself. And I just looked at her face, this fear for her child, this love that she had to want. It says, I need to get myself in for my little baby. And I just looked at her anguish and her love. Nobody saw her, but she kind of squeezed inside to the little corner. And I thought for myself, don't worry, nobody noticed you. You're fine. That is the reality of the immigrant families, the mothers. This is who is coming to the border of the United States, hopeful that they will encounter a welcoming. Receive them. And that's what we did in our little community in South Texas. Offer them a chance to take a bath, to get cleaned up, where water for the first time purifies them and washes off all that dirt, all that pain. And when they walked out of the showers, they walk out with this beautiful glow that reflects how beautiful God is. I would like to close with a litany of hope for immigrants. Let us give all the Lord call us to give, each drop of energy, of love, of compassion, a warm bowl of soup, a pair of shoes, milk for babies, a place to feel safe for at least a moment, a place to pray and give thanks, a place to catch their breath, a place to begin the healing, a smile that lets us know someone cares, that we're not alone, a place where we can release our fears, a place where we can stop running, a place where the children can play, a place to shower, a place where we can share stories, a place to laugh again. Remember the silly moments that keeps us from crying or recalling the mud and the toughness and the terrible journey. Only to sometimes say, otra vez tú. So the stories continue. Somos familia. Together, we're one family. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning again. Buongiorno a tutte e a tutti. Per favore, I don't know which language I have to use now. Please take your seats. Please take your seats because we are already a little late. So I'll go right away to the presentation of our two distinguished speakers after, the powerful, testimonies that we heard, during the first session this morning. Our first speaker is Peter Fan, who has earned 3 doctorates and is the inaugural holder of the Ignacio Ellacuría Chair of Catholic Social Thought at Georgetown University. Emeritus now, no? Not yet, okay. His research deals with the theology of the icon in Orthodox theology, patristic theology, eschatology, the history of Christian missions in Asia, liberation, enculturation, and interreligious dialogue. He's the author or editor of over 40 books and has published over 300 essays. His writings have been translated into Arabic, French, German, Italian, Polish, Portuguese, Romanian, Serbian, Spanish, Chinese, Indonesian, Japanese, and Vietnamese, and have received many awards from learned societies. He's the first non-Anglo to be elected president of the Catholic Theological Society of America and president of the American Theological Society. In 2010, he received the John Courtney Murray Award, the highest honor bestowed to the Catholic Theological Society of America for outstanding achievement in theology. He also been awarded 4 honorary doctorates. He has a collection of doctorates. So, to finish the presentation, I have to say that just a couple of weeks ago was published his latest book on the theology of migration. And the title is, check it out, Christianity and Migration, a Christian Theology for Our Age. It is published by Oxford University Press. So I would recommend this book. And he will recommend others. Join me in welcoming Peter Fan.
Good morning. We are going to ascend to the abstract and rarefied atmosphere of systematic theology from the concrete daily witnesses this morning. Let me begin by thanking the organizers of the International Conference Migration of Pilgrimage of Hope, especially my dear friend, Professor Gioacchino Campese, for the kind invitation to speak on this topic. He has advised me to set aside the magisterial teaching on migration, which Professor Anne Rowland will speak about after me. Finally, he has scheduled my talk for 30 minutes. As you know, Italian 30 minutes is highly elastic. But I will stay within this time. If I go beyond 30 minutes, I ask him to cut off the microphone so we can all go for our second coffee break. He assigned me 3 topics, 3 phases, namely theology of migration, its origins, and then its current developments, and thirdly, where we go from here. As a specific study of migration or theology of migration, it is a very relatively young pedigree. It follows the studies in the social sciences, humanities, and so forth, and which is right because theology must hear, must see clearly before it judges. And so it is very natural that migration has been a subject of studies by geography, demographics, statistics, genetics, history, archaeology, anthropology, sociology, economy, politics, and law. Only then you can do really a theology of migration. And so we need to read as much as possible in these sciences. Even though we are not trained in them, we have to be familiar with what these sciences are talking about migration. And our theology must be based not only on the daily experiences that we have heard this morning, but also from the results of these social sciences. No wonder that we need to have a sense of deep humility when we speak about migration. Very often, we do not know what the heck we are talking about unless we listen to these social sciences. It is very interesting that I would give you the first work in theology of migration, in Italian, Migrazione Dizionario Socio-Pastorale. It was published in 2010, not 2020, 2010, edited by Graziano Battistella. It is one of the earliest, I would say, the beginning of the theology of migration, which take into account the various aspects of migration. So I'd like you have on top of the, you can follow it, all the topics that need to be discussed in migration theology. For example, theology of migration must speak of, for example, the stages of migration, beginning, third, countries of transition, the countries of settlement, and the process of settlement itself. The question of identity, who is a migrant? This is the first question that the migrants ask themselves. Who am I? Am I an American or am I Vietnamese? If I go back to Vietnam, people think that I'm too much Americanized. They're going to recognize me. If I go to America, they say, you are not white, you are not American. You see, the question of identity is very important for migrant. Assimilation, how much? In the workplace, at home, very different. At home, I eat Vietnamese. When I go to work, I have to speak English and to act like an American. Job citizenship, the goal. Can I reach that? How many years I have to wait to get that? Job opportunities. Migration works in so-called hospitality services, hospital, hotel, entertainment industries, and so forth, cleaning. All these are picking up fruits out on the fields. These jobs that are not stolen from the Americans, jobs the Americans do not want to do, are not able to do. These are the jobs of migrants. Healthcare, migration rights, migration associations, the 1.5 generation and second generation of migrants, foreign students, family reunification, so-called chain migration, multiculturalism, interculturalism, transnationalism, and then whether you are tolerated or disseminated, or racism, remittances, and so forth. And then types of migrants. Are they internal or the international, seasonal, irregular, nomadic, refugee, female, ethnic minorities, and diaspora, and then finally pastoral care. You see, it's an extremely complex topic. It's not something that you can take in a course with Professor, I say, is the best professor in Rome, but still. Not Rome, or just in Rome, not universal. But you see, it's not something you can learn in one course of migration. It is something so complicated. And this dictionary is the first one to discuss these issues. Now, in 2010, to 15 years now, it's a bit dated. I wish if I were young, I would like to contribute to the English translation or French translation. So far, it's only Italian. It's unfortunate. So young people, doctoral students here, you want to do something useful, work in the English translation of this dictionary, updated, so it can be really a tool for scholarship. And then there are other works that start at the beginning of the theology of migration. I just give the name. I will not talk about it. You can look at it. And because I trying at beginning, I think I address more to graduate students rather than scholars. So I choose a bibliographical survey so that they can copy down, go into the classroom, ask Professor Gioacchino Campese, have you read them? And they said, no, I haven't read them. So here are the list of things that you are doing, except the first two books edited by Gioacchino Campese and Pietro Cialella. Okay, I hope Professor Cialella is here. I don't know. No, he's not here. And then you have the book edited by Dan Crudi and Campese again, Missione con i migranti, Missione della Chiesa. And then finally, A Promised Land, A Perilous Journey, A Theological Perspective with again, Daniel Crudi and Campese. So these are, shall we say, the trailblazing studies of theology of migration. If you haven't got them, go to library, check out, and read them. So these are the three works, very important. Then next, the theology of migration, recent developments. Those are the last old ones, but these are the new ones. I'd like to introduce you to them. The roots of biblical and patristic theology of migration, of course, the works that I mentioned are not the first one to talk about theology of migration. There is, among the patristic literature, there is one so-called letter to Diognetus. It's a wonderful anonymous letter, but if you want to understand the patristic theology of migration, this is the letter you go and read. Not very long. You can read in about maybe 2-3 hours. You buy a bottle of wine, put in front of you, open it. By the time you finish a bottle of wine, you finish also the article, the letter. So it's a beautiful, rich literature on it. The New Testament is very interesting. The New Testament talks about the strangers and exile. The first letter of Peter describing Christians as pareididomoi, the strangers, and the term resident alien, parokoi, from which you have the word parochia, right? So instead of calling the Pope His Holiness or Cardinal Baggio, you call him migrant in chief. That's what they are. They are migrant in chief. They are parochos. Before they get any other title, it's a title that the New Testament gave to Christians. You are a migrant. So instead of His Excellency, Your Eminence, from now on you say, good morning, migrant in chief. Then you go to the biblical studies. I would like to mention a few of them because it is something that we do not pay enough attention. The work of Daniel Carroll, evangelical author, has written very abundantly on this topic. A Vietnamese SVD, Van Thanh Nguyen, and then you have the work of the famous Daniel Smith, Christopher, A Biblical Theology of Exile, and more works on the prophetic ministry, prophetic literature on migration. These are the works that really introduce us into the biblical theology of migration. I will come back to this later a little bit more, but these are the works that first part of your course, read these. Without a solid foundation on the biblical theology of migration. Migration is a theme present every page of the Bible, and yet the term migration is not there. It is important how to read Old Testament, New Testament without with the eye to the migration theme, and you would discover the whole new world of the Bible on migration. Second, historical studies. One book, extremely useful, beautiful, by Jehu Hansius, is called Migration and the Making of Global Christianities. And it's 500 pages long, but it's the groundbreaking work on how to read Christian missions in the first 500 years. I hope that he will continue to develop the last, to today. I think he's working on it. It's a different of mine, so I am glad to talk about it. And then if you want to have a textbook for your classes to do the patristic sources, the next work is Amy Auden. It is a collection of primary sources of New Testament on migration. It's again a very useful tool for a doctoral student, graduate student. Moving now to systematic theology. By systematic theology, I mean a logical, comparative, systematic study of migration. The first part is Christology. You see, Christology. I am sad to say that there is not a real good book on this topic. It's strange, isn't it? That on Christology, there is not a one work dedicated specifically to the figure of Christ as a migrant. Talk about something else, but not a migrant. So I wish future authors, graduate students, write a book on Jesus as a migrant. It will be one of the best sellers you have, all right? And it will make you a name in the world of scholarship, because right now there is none. Yes, and of course, made you rich as well, but that is concerned about your survival, economic survival. But it really is sad. There's not one work that is really well. Instead of ecclesiology, huge collection of ecclesiology on the church. For example, you have the work of Susan Snyder, Joshua Ruston, and then you have Agnes Prazal, and may I say the work from Asia, Cardinal Fabio Baggio. He's not here, but I still to talk about this book because that is the first book on migration from the perspective of Asia. A bit dated now, but still it's a trailblazing book that he edited with Prazal, Agnes Prazal. On interreligious perspective, again, you have several important books. For example, by Richard Alba, edited Immigration and Religion in America. And then you have the book by Alexander Huang, Timani, edited The Trenches in This World, Multi-Religious Reflection on Migration. I will come back to this again on the third part, but these are the works that can be very helpful because migration is not simply a Christian concern. It is a concern of all world religions, beginning from Hinduism to Buddhism, Judaism, and Islam. So I will talk about that later a little bit more. An ecumenical perspective, again, Daniel Carroll's work is also very useful. Migration and mission, also very important topic we heard this morning from Cardinal Tagle. That's how mission and migration are intrinsically linked. And lastly, I would say works that really that need to be read carefully from page to page. And the work is by Brett Hoover, by Gemma Turucruz, a Filipino, and this book. It's called A Theology of Migration, the Bodies, Refugees, and the Body of Christ, by none other than Daniel Grudy. Now, I know graduate students are very poor. They can buy every book. But if you have to buy one book in your lifetime, this is the book. All right? In Spanish too. Why? If you want to read the whole book, that's fine. But read the foreword by Pope Francis. Who theology has a work written by a pope as a foreword? Only his. So, Dan, I expect a check from you for publicity, okay? On ethics, can you move up, all right? On ethics, you have, first of all, secular ethics. Ethics from a philosophical point of view, not from Christian, non-revelation, anything. From secular point of view, philosophical point of view. And the most important work, I think, is Joseph Cairns, a Canadian philosopher and sociologist. Excellent work. I just mentioned 1-2 books there, but if you need to have a philosophical ethics of migration, this is the book to go to. On Christian ethics, I have several to recommend. The first one is Christian Hire, Kinship Across Borders, the very first one, the trailblazing book. And then by a Jesuit, William O'Neill, also very important work. And Tisha Rajendra, also very important. And then the last one is David Hollenbach, the most recent one, is a Jesuit from Georgetown, is Humanity in Crisis. So again, those of you who are interested in the ethics of migration, you can approach it from the philosophical and Christian point of view. These are the works that you may be interested in. Finally, the topic that has attracted a lot of attention is on the topic of hospitality. Now, hospitality became a central concern, after Jacques Derrida, of all people, talks about hospitality as an unconditional duty. Unconditional. Imagine from this postmodern philosopher whose writing is absolutely incomprehensible. But this one work of his is the one that spurred discussion on hospitality. So I like to mention at least the work of Kristen Paul. He's dead now, but she's dead now, but it's very important. And then Jessica Russell, also very important. And then the other works, Richard Coney and James Taylor. So there you have the word hospitality become central. I would argue that hospitality is mutual. Not only the indigenous, the native people welcoming the migrants, but the migrants themselves become the host to the guests who are the native. That's very important. It's not one direction, the native to the migrant, but the migrant themselves become the host. Okay. Now, how many more minutes I have? Yes, 10 minutes. Oh, plenty. Yeah, plenty. Now, as I said, I have chosen the bibliographical survey as a way of helping you understand what's being done, the past, the present. So helpful. I could have done by talking about the theology, but I'd rather refrain from speaking about them. Now, in the conclusion, I would like to say, so what? What do we start from here? Where do we go from here? I think we must start from the horrible treatment, the inhuman, the cruel, the illegal treatment of migrants, especially in the United States under the presidency of Trump. We cannot keep silent. On the 18th of this month, there was a so-called No King. 7 million Americans came out. Over 2,600 cities. It was not organized by the church. No cardinal was present. No bishop was present. By the people. Against the inhuman, unjust, cruel, illegal treatment of migrants. We cannot speak today of theology of migration without paying attention to this. Otherwise, we abdicate our responsibility as citizens of the world and of the United States. And so it forces us to reread the history of the Old Testament, the Jewish people, history of Christianity, and our contemporary world in the light of what's going on today in the world against the migrants. The first book of the Bible, book of Genesis, which was the first act of the so-called Adam and Eve. Have you ever pay attention? They were chased out of Eden. But it was the first act of forced migration. They came from a very nice area with fruits and everything they can eat to where they had to earn bread with the sweat of their brow. This is the first act. Whether they were Adam and Eve or not, that we don't need to discuss. But the first symbolic act of humanity is an act of migration from a garden of delights to a place of aridity, no water. They had to raise all things in order to live. Is it not the experience of migrants? The experience of entering a new world, a different world, a world of sufferings, a world of labor and toil and so forth. That's how you read the Old Testament, the beginning of the scripture. Again, the book of Exodus. I wish we didn't refer it to the book of Exodus anymore. It's the book of migration. Because the book of Exodus is framed in terms of conquest, of power, of miraculous intervention of God. And that's how we read the story of Israel. But the beginning of Israel is the story of migration from Egypt. It is not a liberation that we, the liberation theologians, make it into a story. It's the book of migration. Change the name and you can read it differently. It's a book of migration. It is not a conquest coming in and Jericho fell down and they occupied the land. It is the narrative for the victors. You see, the book of Exodus is told from the perspective of the winners, of the occupiers of the Holy Land, the Palestine. Read it on the reverse. Read it as a group of 5,000, 6,000 migrants from Egypt moving in little by little, not occupied by power, but assimilating with the local people. And that is the story of migration, not the book of Exodus of power and victory. It's a group of migrants who enter into the land. The story of Jesus as a baby. Again, very few of us look at Christmas. And we all know the story, angels singing and all that. No, it's the story of the Holy Family, of first refugee in the history of Christianity. The first refugees. They were escaping to avoid being killed by Herod. And then so many, 3, 4 years in Egypt. They didn't know anybody there. They didn't have uncle and aunt down there to welcome them. As a Holy Family there. And then the return migration, not back to Jerusalem, but to Galilee. Isn't that the story of most migrants? And yet we don't read it. We read a beautiful angelic story, romantic stories of the angels singing, all that kind of thing at Christmas. That is the story we have to pay. Again, the story of Jesus' ministry. He was a migrant teacher. He traveled from place to place, from Capernaum to Jerusalem. 3 years he walked. But we don't pay attention. We talk about parables. We talk about this, a miracle he performed. He was a migrant, okay? And then the history of Christianity itself, whoever teaches history, church history here, read it as a series of migration of Christians. Yes, okay. And then migration as the story of different religions. I talk about Judaism. But what about Islam? Islam would not have existed without, as a religion, without the Jira, the migration of the Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Medina. That's the beginning of Islam. Islam is rooted in a migration of the Prophet Muhammad and the Buddha. For 40 years, Jesus in 3 years. He did 40 years as a migrant teacher from place to place. Never did he just go and preach. That's the story of these religions that you have to rediscover. And finally, I like to reconceive systematic theology. Who is God? And you read from the Bible, God is a co-migrant. Yahweh migrated with his people. Remember the tabernacle? He stayed there. Every time they move, they live up the tent and they move. And Yahweh moved with them. That's the God of Israel, the God who moved with his people. And the New Testament, Jesus, God the Father. Who is it? God the Father is creator. But what means creator? Creator is moving out of the world of the Trinity into the world of time as an exile. Jesus' incarnation is the paradigmatic migrant out of heaven, he came into the world as a migrant, live without being accepted. Gospel of John. The Holy Spirit is the dynamic migrant. God is primordial migrant, Jesus is the paradigmatic migrant, and the Holy Spirit is dynamic migrant. That give power and hope to the migrants that continue today. So that's what I would like to present you as a new systematic theology of migration. Thank you.
So thank you, Peter, for this brief but effective overview and theology of migration. Now we go to Professor Anna Rowlands, who holds the St. Hilda Chair in Catholic Social Thought and Practice at Durham University, UK. She's a political theologian who works on a range of themes, including for over 20 years, human migration, the politics of the common good, and concepts of human dignity. She had just concluded 3 years working in support of the work of the Office of the Synod of Bishops and the Dicastery for promoting integral human development, where she was a member. She's the author of Towards a Politics of Communion, Catholic Social Teaching in Dark Times, 2021, in which there is a whole chapter on migration. Yeah, you confirm. Which won an expanded reason Ratzinger Foundation Prize in 2023. She's the co-editor of Oxford Handbook on Religion and Contemporary Migration, 2025, so a recent book, which emerged from 4 years of working on the refugee hosts project on the role of religion in responding to displacement from the war in Syria. She's currently writing a book on the theme of migration in the work of Hannah Arendt, Simone Weil, and Gillian Rose. Please, let's welcome Anna Rowlands.
Buongiorno a tutti, and grazie, thank you to Gioacchino and the organizers of this conference for the invitation to be amongst you all this morning. My paper will be a little more Anglo-Saxon in style, I'm afraid, and will explore the development of the Church's social teaching under 3 headings: thinking about migration as a feature of modernity, outlining what I will call, after Pope Francis, the social gaze of the Church with regards to migration, and then summarizing in a very fast run-through some of the major themes of Catholic social teaching documents on migration. So, migration under the conditions of modernity. The Church's modern social teaching has developed in an era characterized by large-scale human migration. Considering the Church has a duty to interpret the signs of the times, and recognizing that migration is a dominant sign of these times, it would be simply unthinkable for Catholic social teaching to have evolved without sustained attention to this reality. St. John Paul II famously described modernity as, quote, a globalized era in which space is reshaped, distances annihilated, and life in one place reverberates globally. Migration is then the prime example that exemplifies John Paul II's description of modernity. Modernity and migration are simply co-implicating categories. Politically, the Church's social teaching on migration spans a century, the 20th century, in which we have moved from the absence of passports to their centrality, from most people living within the boundaries of an empire. If you think 100 years ago, most people in the world still lived within the boundaries of an empire, to inhabiting nation states or nation statelessness. Economically, the Church has traced the shift from a newly industrialized mindset, eager for ever new sources of cheap migrant labor, to our current era, when capital, goods, and information take precedence in cross-border movements. This outlook has helped create new ideological and political frontiers, we've heard them this morning, that facilitate the movement of some people to serve capital interests, while simultaneously raising border walls higher for others, especially for those fleeing conflict, persecution, and increasingly natural disasters. My second theme, understanding the social gaze of the church. The church's social teaching on migration is determined by its unique social gaze, the lens that we bring as Christians to this question that Peter has just been talking about. As with the question of poverty, migration is examined as both a sociological fact and a theologically resonant reality that no Christian can be indifferent to. In the scriptures, faith leads to sight, and indeed to the healing of sight. In that context, we might observe that the church's social gaze on migration is founded on certain basic assumptions about faith. The social gaze of the church centers, first of all, on the dignity, as Sister Norma talked about this morning, of every migrant, whose reality should inspire justice and compassion without hesitation. In the migrant, Christ speaks to us, and we see an icon of the church's own condition. The writings of many of the books Peter was talking about simply elucidate that point. Secondly, the church does not seek to present a neutral or purely technical account of migration. That is not the church's task or vocation. Rather, it shares a committed, located story of human nature, human purpose, and human destiny, rooted in the narratives, the truth-telling of scripture and tradition. What is that story? All persons are creatures of a common creator, sharing a dignity and a divine purpose that they receive as nothing else but gift. We're social and interdependent beings who satisfy our basic needs and flourish only in cooperation with others. We form particular, distinct, beautiful, diverse societies, yet we long for communion through intercultural exchange. What else is this conference? And unity with God, who is the source and summit of our lives. We are imperfect and sinful beings who often misjudge these desires and foster division, chaos, disorder, and confusion, replacing fraternity with suspicion and fear. This transcendent perspective, which recognizes that we are not sole creators of our world, but creatures who cooperate and co-create with a triune God, allows us to engage more freely, and it is difficult to engage freely with the question of migration these days, to engage more freely, more responsibly, and more hopefully with both the gifts and the challenges of human migration, even in the most troubling and desperate circumstances. Therefore, our social gaze stems from a belief in a divinely willed human fraternity and in the potential to transform this fraternity into a committed, sustained practice of just and loving social friendship, always shaped by our conformity to our own nature and to Christ's promise of salvation for all. The magisterium treats migration as part of its account of the mission of the people of God, which is, quote, to open up to all the road to a more human life. Lumen Gentium describes the church as the people of God on its journey towards perfection, and the numerous messages for World Migrant Day issued by successive popes reflect this image of the people of God so central to Vatican II, recognizing the significant role that migrant experience plays in shaping the church as the people of God, progressing towards perfection. In the words of Gaudium et Spes, quote, everyone must consider his or her neighbor without exception as another self, taking into account first of all his or her life and the means necessary for living it with dignity. In our times, a special obligation binds us, this is still the same quote, in our times, a special obligation binds us to make ourselves the neighbor of every person without exception, and of actively helping him or her when they come across our path, whether they be an old person abandoned by all, a foreign laborer unjustly looked down upon, a refugee, end of quote. The Church's social gaze is also grounded in a moral distinction between two main types of migration. The first involves migration freely undertaken in pursuit of opportunity, new horizons of human experience, cultural learning, and fresh contexts to contribute skills, and through this, to support and develop themselves and their families. It also recognizes that the very existence of some cultures is expressed through living nomadically, through living itinerant lives. The second type of migration occurs due to necessity or through force driven by persecution, war, resource scarcity, economic instability, climate volatility, or enforced through expulsion, deportation, slavery, or trafficking. All of those are named in the social teaching documents. The Church recognizes both kinds of migration, and its gaze falls preferentially on the poorest and most marginalized in those categories. Therefore, among those migrants the Church accompanies with particular attention are internally displaced persons, and we know that the numbers of internally displaced people are growing internationally. Those in prolonged immobility, and again, one of the major changes in our lifetime is the numbers of people who are in migration situations where they are in protracted immobility. They're migrants who are immobile, but not by their own choice, in detention centers and camps, and individuals in high-risk situations as they attempt to cross the increasingly perilous land or sea routes between borders. St. John Paul II proclaimed, quote, "A Christian call for a closeness to migrants traveling outside of established legal routes," so exactly those who are presented in the world's media as the least deserving of attention. The gospel flips that, and John Paul II says that there is a particular call for closeness by the Church to migrants traveling outside of established legal routes, seeing these people as icons of the despoiled traveler on the road to Jericho. Again, John Paul II's words. The Church's social gaze is also structured by seeking the good even amidst loss. The movement of people should become an opportunity, no matter how it starts, for solidarity, justice, and charity. Migration naturally brings people and cultures into greater proximity. However, an attitude of openness and receptivity is essential to transform this reality into opportunities for dialogue, for integration, and ultimately, to use another word we've already used this morning, a communion that fosters personal growth and genuine relationships. This includes dialogue between religions and a deep exchange of cultural gifts. Finally, the Church's social gaze is towards what I would call, and what the Church calls, integral rather than technical accounts of migration. The Church doesn't primarily talk about push and pull factors in its analysis, but rather it seeks to hold the individual human person in community together, looking at the web of economic, political, cultural, religious, and ecological factors that drive and limit human mobility. How do we move towards that integral rather than a technical account of human migration? And then my third and final section, a brave and foolish attempt to summarize in about 10 minutes the documents and key teachings of the social teaching tradition. So if your favorite bit is missed out, I'm really sorry. You get to talk about that in your panel. So, in the early 1900s, the changing spiritual and material needs of Catholic migrants led to provisions for the care of migrants through the establishment of new missionary congregations. We are the beneficiary of such in being here even today. And new instructions for the preparation of clergy to assist in liturgical, linguistic, and cultural care of migrants. So these are the documents of 1914 and 1918. This was followed in the aftermath of the Second World War by Pope Pius XII's Exul Familia. It begins by invoking the memory of the migration of the Holy Family of Nazareth and speaks of the Christian responsibility to ensure that the memory of the incarnation of Christ into hardship and grief so that he might accompany us in ours does not grow dim. Christians are counseled to offer hope, comfort, and unremitting care to those who migrate, to provide aid, comfort, guidance, sacraments, and all possible spiritual care for, quote, migrants of every kind. By contrast, Pope Pius XII warns of the sinful political tendencies towards, quote, an unrestrained desire for extending national boundaries, for an idolatrized supremacy of race, an unbridled tendency to occupy foreign lands, and for reliance upon might, this is still part of the quote, for a reliance upon might rather than right, with consequent cruel and shameless deportation of entire nations and the forced migration of peoples, end of quote. The document considered to be the Church's Magna Carta on migration addresses the natural rights and the inherent dignity of migrants. Pius founds what he calls a natural right to migrate in the very nature of the land itself and the need for every family for living space. Teaching the universal destination of goods, Pius XII notes that, quote, the creator of the earth made all good things primarily for the good of all, end of quote. Thus, the natural law urges in conflict and displacement, unemployment or hunger that, quote, ways of migration be opened to people, end of quote. Since land makes possible the support of large numbers of people, the sovereignty of the state, the document says, although it must be respected, these are really crucial words, cannot be exaggerated to the point that access to this land is, for inadequate or unjustified reasons, denied to those in need from other nations, if the common good can support it. These are the spaces of discernment in political communities, but the obligations are clear. This same theme, rooting the response to migration in the universal destination of goods, is of course so often repeated in the social teaching of John Paul II and Pope Francis in their own attempt to provide that integral view of the economic, the political, the cultural, and the ecological. The Second Vatican Council, then moving on to the next set of texts, reiterates the theological, pastoral, and canonical themes of Exul Familia, focusing in particular on the rights of migrants, the duties of states, the inalienable dignity of the person, and the unjust economic inequalities associated with migration. The social encyclicals and conciliar documents of this period explicitly recognize a right to family migration. And if there is a right that is fundamentally challenged globally right now, it is the right to family migration. So here we have it in the text of the Second Vatican Council period. A right to family migration when the welfare of the family is better supported by the opportunity to secure liberty of private ownership, which has a great part to play in the welfare of families. From the post-conciliar teachings, we can then summarize the following concrete teachings. So this is an attempt just in the very final section to quickly condense what are the main teachings since Vatican II on migration across World Migration Day messages, core social encyclicals, apostolic exhortations, etc. So first of all, the rights, duties, and obligations. First of all, the dignity of the human person underpins the right of everyone to a homeland and to live there freely alongside their family. This right to a homeland includes access to the essentials for a dignified life, which include, and I think this is really interesting that the cultural dimensions are so focused upon, the preservation of one's linguistic, cultural, and religious heritage, and the recognition and respectful treatment of one's dignity as a human being. Forced displacement or the deprivation of the material means to support life, including family life, violate these rights and represent a failure of duty by the political community. Every individual depends on the support, the membership of a social, political, and economic community in order to survive and to develop, to do more than merely survive, to develop their full human potential. In turn, every migrant has the duty to contribute to the genuine progress of their homeland in accordance with their ability, and particularly in what the texts at this period call underdeveloped, we wouldn't use that language now, regions, quote, saving the personal right of migration. In a society committed to dignity and the common good, the human person, the documents are clear, should be free to stay or free to leave. When this right is denied, a natural right exists for individuals or families to migrate, and a duty is placed on states to accept migrants and to judge their claims with justice, always respecting their dignity, their claims for protection, and their right to belonging. Quote, where a state which suffers from poverty combined with great population cannot supply such a use of goods to its inhabitants, or where the state places conditions which offend against human dignity, people possess a right to emigrate, to select a new home in foreign lands, and to seek conditions of life worthy of man or woman, end of quote. As Fratelli Tutti, picking this theme up, states, it is, quote, unacceptable that the mere place of one's birth or residence should result in his or her possessing fewer opportunities for a developed and dignified life, end of quote. And this right applies to individuals and entire families. The next theme is that the duty placed upon states to accept migrants seeking sanctuary applies universally and, quote, so far as the good of their own community, and then the next phrase and clause is really important, rightly understood, permits, with greater responsibility borne by those with more access to wealth and material resources necessary for survival. So you can make an argument for the protection of the common good of your own community, but this has to be rightly understood. States hold a dual obligation, therefore, to safeguard the rights of their citizens and to provide aid and acceptance to migrants. Balancing these responsibilities helps realize the common good within the specific context of each political community. And pursuing this goal requires the virtues of prudence and courage from civic leaders. The more that we see tensions, therefore, between the duty to accept migrants and the question of the common good in a political community for established citizens, the more one has to ask questions about the nature of political prudence and courage within those structures. We're invited into the space of reflection. Public authorities are warned that they must not unjustly deny individuals the right to emigrate or immigrate unless there are grave reasons related to the local or national common good assessed objectively. Protection of wealth or economic privilege alone, the documents are clear, is not sufficient to justify such a denial. GDP alone is not a reason to deny the right of somebody to immigrate or emigrate. And a willingness to make sacrifices to preserve the survival and dignity of others is regarded as a specific Christian virtue. St. John Paul II highlighted the need for politicians to actively guide populations beyond what he called their instinctive protective instincts in light of the universal destination of goods and the universal common good. Citizens are encouraged to nurture, quote, and this could have been written for today, a generous and loyal spirit of patriotism, but without narrow-mindedness. I'll continue the quote. This means that they will always direct their attention to the good of the whole human family, united by the different ties which bind together races, peoples, and nations. End of quote. In turn, migrants have, of course, duties towards their host society to orientate themselves towards language, custom, and patrimony. This should be done, quote, voluntarily and gradually, and without compulsion or hindrance. Equally, quote, hastening complete integration, so offering the opportunities for migrants to integrate as quickly as possible, is itself an act of justice. No matter where they live, human beings have a right to a country in which they can have their own home, find fulfillment in a context of security, trust, harmony, and peace, end of quote. Recognizing the value in the culture carried in a language or a culture or religion in reciprocal form, a host society is actively encouraged by the Church's social doctrine to protect a migrant's right to retain their own language and spiritual heritage, as well as adopting those of their new culture. The family, the primary unit of all societies, remains a central focus for the Church's reflections on the rights and duties of migrants, as I've noted. Families have a right to migrate together, to have their claims heard together, and to remain together through the process. Civic authorities must protect their unity at all stages. John Paul II noted that, quote, "The family seems to be the most fragile and vulnerable of structures, and the point at which the most thorny and negative aspects of migration concentrate their attack." So there's a reason why families end up so in the firing line. The magisterium repeatedly highlights the evils of spousal separation, children deprived of their parents, discrimination faced by migrant families in housing, health, education, employment, and the vulnerability associated with the reliance of migrant families on the goodwill of strangers. Under the rule of law, the protection and reunification of migrant families is an essential priority for safeguarding human dignity. Nevertheless, rights and duties alone are considered insufficient or not considered sufficient to protect those who migrate or form strong fraternal communities among diverse peoples. Migrants, the documents are clear, should never be viewed as mere tools of production, but as dignified and independent individuals with a right to live with their families and be incorporated into the life of a society. The Council Fathers warn that, quote, "Whatever violates the integrity of the human person, insults human dignity, such as inhuman living conditions, arbitrary imprisonment, deportation, slavery, all these things and others of their like are infamies indeed. They poison human society, but they harm, and this is really important, but they harm those who practice them more than those who suffer from the injury." That's worth a whole conversation in and of itself. Moreover, they are a supreme dishonor to the Creator. End of quote. National and international organizations have duties and responsibilities towards migrants, the tradition also notes. The primary duty of nations towards their citizens is to ensure the right not to have to emigrate in the first place and to make that meaningful for their population. Protecting this right not to emigrate is an obligation of each nation and a shared responsibility among nations for the common good that transcends borders. So you can already see that requires international cooperation. In practical terms, this involves the obvious providing of conditions of meaningful work, education, decent housing, clean water, a hospitable climate, healthcare, cultural and religious freedoms. In a profoundly interconnected world, no nation can sustain these conditions, say the documents, for the common good alone. Only a commitment to create extensive networks of regional and international cooperation and collaboration can protect the right to remain in one's homeland. Already in 1961, John XXIII noted that human beings had entered an era when, through the use of technologies and organizational capacities, it had become possible to coordinate economic, political, and legal systems to ensure that nobody is hungry, nobody lacks land, nobody lacks work, and nobody lacks a roof over their head. We have had that capacity globally for decades, and yet. Pachaminteris argued for using such mechanisms, technologies, and organizational structures to achieve a proper balance between land, population, and capital, with collaboration between nations to ensure a just and sustainable circulation of goods. The real moral question concerning this is the political will of nations to make this a reality. Fratelli Tutti expanded on this, noting inequity affects not only individuals, but also entire countries, compelling us to rethink the ethics of international relations and to establish a new network between nations that, quote, recognizes and respects not only the right of individuals, but also social rights and the rights of peoples. Only effective regional and global cooperation enabling mid and long-term planning, which is not limited to emergency responses, will help turn the rights of peoples into a reality. When the right not to emigrate fails and forced migration becomes a reality, every nation and the broader international community must uphold the fourfold duty that we will hear about in these next 2 days: to welcome, to protect, to promote, and to integrate without distinction. And then finally, 2 points which I think are particularly important for a theological contribution to this debate. The social encyclicals and Fratelli Tutti, above all, did this so beautifully, highlight the importance of gratuitousness, which is not a category we generally find in our political discourses. The capacity to do the good simply because it is right, without expecting any reward or benefit. The obligation to welcome strangers is rooted in our duty to protect rights and dignity, but also to express the fact that we are part of an order of gratuitousness. That, to quote Pope Francis, life without fraternal gratuitousness becomes nothing more than a form of frenetic commerce in which we are constantly weighing up what we give and what we get back in return. And of course, Fratelli Tutti goes on then to warn about narrow forms of nationalism that come to then disrespect that need for gratuitousness. And then this is the point I want to really end on. Interestingly, the social encyclicals also encourage us to recognize the importance of what they call truth in politics, expressing concern about the dissemination of information that distorts truth for opportunistic political and partisan gain, damaging the reputation of another nation or a specific ethnic or racial group, including particularly the effects of the politics of truth on migrant groups. Quote, if society is to have a future, it must respect the truth of our human dignity and it must submit to that truth. End of quote. A commitment to truth in politics helps pave the way for encounters between people that foster social peace. Quote again, it would be easier to keep freedoms and differences in check with cleverness and a few resources. But such a peace would be superficial and fragile, not the fruit of a culture of encounter that brings enduring stability. Integrating differences is a much more difficult and slow process, yet it is the guarantee of a genuine and lasting peace. That peace is not achieved by recourse only to those who are pure and untainted, since even people who can be considered questionable on account of their errors have something to offer which must not be overlooked. End of quote. Nor does it come from ignoring social demands or quelling disturbances, since it is not, quote, a consensus on paper or a transient peace for a contented minority, end of quote. What is important, Pope Francis said, is to create processes of encounter, processes that build a people that can accept differences. Let us arm our children, he says, with the weapons of dialogue. Let us teach them to fight the good fight of the culture of encounter. End of quote.